They told us Africa was poor, that our ancestors wore chains while Europe wore crowns. But what they never said was that Africa's crowns were made of pure gold, its palaces lined with ivory, its kings ruling empires that stretched beyond the horizon. For centuries, the story of African wealth has been buried under dust and denial. Textbooks called Europe civilized, while the kingdoms of Mali, Benin, Songhai, and Ghana were dismissed as myths. Yet every coin, every chronicle, every traveler's diary whispered a different truth. Africa was the economic heartbeat of the ancient world. Look closely at any medieval map. Africa isn't blank, it's glittering. In the center, a dark-skinned emperor holds up a golden orb. His name, Mansa Musa. Cartographers painted him not as a slave, but as the richest human alive. But over time, those maps changed. The gold disappeared. The faces faded. The lie of poverty began. While Europe was clawing its way out of the Dark Ages, Africa was minting gold by the ton. Kings traded across the Sahara, from the Niger to the Nile, sending caravans so vast they looked like moving cities. Gold from Africa built the cathedrals of Europe, financed the Renaissance, and fueled the birth of global trade. Yet the world still calls Africa poor. How can the source of the world's wealth be poor? The truth was never lost. It was hidden. Libraries burned, art stolen. Records rewritten to glorify the colonizer and erase the conquered. For every European king praised in history books, there was an African monarch whose story was silenced, whose wealth, power, and wisdom were too great to fit the narrative of inferiority. But today, that silence ends. Across the continent, the ancestors are speaking again. Their voices echo through ruins, through art, through the DNA of nations. This is not about nostalgia. It's about truth. For centuries, the crowns of Africa were buried, but the gold still shines beneath the soil. In this film, we will uncover the stories of 7 kings whose wealth and power eclipsed that of any European ruler. 7 men who commanded armies, minted their own gold, and shaped economies before Europe even dreamed of empires. From the deserts of Mali to the palaces of Benin, from the battlefields of Zululand to the throne of Ethiopia, these were not just kings. They were legends of abundance, architects of civilization, and guardians of Africa's forgotten prosperity. This is the story they never wanted the world to remember. This is Echoes of the Ancients, and these are the 7 African kings richer than any European ruler. His name echoed across the desert winds. Musa Keita I, the Lion of Mali, the Shadow of Gold, the man who turned sand into empire. In the 14th century, when Europe's kings fought over scraps of land and called it glory, one African ruler commanded wealth so vast that his generosity broke economies. Mansa Musa, the richest human being in all recorded history. Musa inherited more than a throne. He inherited a civilization of genius. The Mali Empire stretched across West Africa, controlling half the world's known gold supply. Towns like Niani and Timbuktu were not mud huts, as colonizers claimed. They were thriving metropolises. Gold dust floated in the air. Markets buzzed with traders from Cairo, Arabia, and beyond. Under Musa's rule, Mali became the richest empire the world had ever seen. But his wealth wasn't only measured in gold. It was in knowledge, faith, and architecture. Musa built libraries that rivaled Alexandria, universities that drew scholars from all of Africa and the Middle East. Mali was not a kingdom. It was a world superpower. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca. But this was no simple journey of faith. It was a spectacle the world would never forget. Musa left Mali with over 60,000 men. 12,000 slaves and 80 camels, each camel carrying over 300 pounds of gold. He built mosques along the way, gave alms to the poor, and dazzled every kingdom he passed. When he reached Cairo, his generosity became legend. Musa gave away so much gold that he caused an inflation crisis that lasted over a decade. The value of gold collapsed. Economies trembled. One man's charity reshaped the global market. Historians have tried to measure his fortune in modern terms. Some estimate it would be worth over $400 billion today. That's more than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Rockefeller combined. But Musa's true wealth wasn't in his treasury. It was in his vision. He returned from Mecca not as a conqueror, but as a builder. With his return, Mansa Musa transformed Mali. He commissioned architects from across Africa and Arabia, including the famous Abu Ishaq al-Saheli, to design mosques, palaces, and learning centers. He founded Timbuktu's Sankore University, where mathematics, astronomy, law, and philosophy flourished. Thousands of manuscripts were written and preserved, a library that would later rival Europe's best. Under Musa, knowledge was power, and education was gold. He proved that a kingdom built on wisdom lasts longer than one built on war. But centuries later, as Europe rose and colonized, the story of Mali faded. Musa's name was stripped from history books, his empire dismissed as legend. Yet the truth refuses to die. The gold coins still lie buried beneath Mali's soil. The manuscripts of Timbuktu still whisper the name Mansa Musa, the man who made the world bow before Africa. When Europe dreamed of kings, Africa had emperors, and none shone brighter than the man the world still calls Mansa Musa, the emperor who made the world bow. Before Wall Street, before the Bank of England, before a single European mint existed, Africa already had a financial system so advanced, travelers called it the center of gold. And at its heart stood a man whose wisdom and justice made kingdoms thrive. King Tenkamenin of Ghana, the banker of the ancient world. 1,000 years before Europe's so-called Age of Discovery, West Africa already pulsed with wealth and organization. The Empire of Ghana, also known as Ouagadougou, was the first great kingdom of West Africa. At its height, Ghana's borders stretched from Senegal to Niger, and every ounce of gold that moved across West Africa passed through its hands. Tenkamenin sat at the center of it all, ruling from his capital Kumbi Saleh, a city so radiant that travelers claimed its streets glittered with gold dust. Unlike the monarchs of Europe who hid behind walls and guards, Tenkamenin ruled with transparency and justice. Every morning he opened his court to anyone who sought audience. From the poorest farmer to the wealthiest merchant, all could speak directly to their king. He listened, he judged fairly, he made decisions guided by the elders and the divine. His people said, "Justice flows from Tenkamenin like gold from the earth." Ghana's true power was its economy. It stood between the salt mines of the Sahara and the gold mines of Bambouk and Wangara, controlling the trade routes that connected Africa to the Arab world and beyond. Every trader who passed through Ghana paid taxes, not in coin, but in gold dust. With each grain of gold, Tenkamenin's empire grew richer and more organized. He built systems of taxation, foreign exchange, and regulation centuries before Europe's central banks existed. In every sense, he was the banker of the medieval world. Yet wealth alone did not define Tenkamenin. His reign was marked by religious tolerance and cultural brilliance. In Guyana, Muslims and traditional worshippers lived side by side. Trade brought not only goods, but ideas, mathematics, astronomy, and governance. Tenkamenin welcomed it all. He understood that gold could buy kingdoms, but wisdom sustained them. But even empires of gold are not eternal. In the 11th century, Foreign armies and shifting trade routes weakened Ghana's power. The Almoravids, a North African dynasty, invaded, and Ghana's brilliance dimmed. Yet even as the kingdom fell, its legacy lived on. In Mali, in Songhai, and in the memories of merchants who once walked its golden streets. For it was Tenkamenin who first showed the world that Africa could build an economy based not on conquest, but on commerce, fairness, and innovation. They called him the King of Gold, the father of fair trade, the man who turned commerce into civilization. King Tenkamenin, the banker of the ancient world. While Europe stumbled through its so-called Dark Ages, in the heart of West Africa rose a city so brilliant, so architecturally advanced, that early European explorers stood in stunned disbelief. Its avenues were straighter than London's. Its walls stretched longer than China's Great Wall, and at its center stood a man who built it all. Oba Ewuare the Great, the architect of empire. Around the year 1440, Benin was in turmoil. Civil war had torn the kingdom apart, the royal line broken, the people divided. Then came Ewuare, a prince in exile, guided by vision and vengeance. He returned not just to reclaim his throne, but to rebuild his nation into something the world had never seen before. What he created would later shock Portuguese explorers, who confessed that Benin City rivaled anything in Europe. Under Ewuare's command, the city was reborn. He ordered the construction of an urban marvel, 10,000 interlocking walls stretching for over 16,000 kilometers. Not defensive walls of fear, but walls of unity, connecting communities, marking the heartbeat of a civilization that believed in order, discipline, and artistry. Every street led back to the Oba's palace, a vast complex of courtyards, galleries, and shrines. Archaeologists later found that Benin city planning was so precise it outclassed anything in Europe until the 1800s. Let that sink in. While Paris was still a tangle of mud streets, Benin City already had a grid system. Ewuare wasn't just a builder, he was a reformer. He introduced new systems of law, taxation, and governance. He elevated artisans and priests to new prominence, ensuring that beauty and spirituality guided statecraft. He reorganized the guild system that made Benin a workshop of genius. Bronze casters, ivory carvers, cloth weavers, all under royal patronage. Every masterpiece they made belonged first to the kingdom, then to the world. The famed Benin bronzes, those sculptures now sitting in British and German museums, began under Ewuare's reign. Trade routes expanded under his rule. Benin dealt in ivory, pepper, palm oil, coral, and gold, commodities so valuable that European monarchs begged for access. When the Portuguese finally arrived in 1485, they expected to find primitive huts. Instead, they found a metropolis. Broad streets, sanitation systems, illuminated courtyards. The royal palace alone spanned more area than medieval Lisbon. The Portuguese chroniclers wrote, "The city is large and well-ordered, the houses clean, the people courteous, and the king's power absolute." They had stumbled upon a black civilization more advanced and more organized than their own. Centuries later, in 1897, British forces stormed Benin under the excuse of a punitive expedition. They burned Ewuare's legacy to the ground, stole thousands of bronzes, and called it a civilizing mission. What they really did was erase evidence that Africa had already mastered civilization long before Europe claimed the word. But fire cannot erase memory. Even in ruins, the story of Ewuare lived on, whispered through generations, carved into bronze, preserved in spirit. Today, the stolen bronzes sit behind glass in foreign museums. But their true home, their soul, still lies in Benin. Every line, every carving, every bead of coral whispers the same truth. Africa built wonders long before it was plundered. And the man who proved it beyond all doubt was Oba Ewuare the Great, the architect of empire. Long before Disney's Lion King, there was the real Lion King, Sundiata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire. He rose from exile, a crippled boy mocked and cast aside, to unite the warring kingdoms of Bambara, Fulani, Malinka under one banner. He faced the Soso king, Sumanguru, at the Battle of Karina, and history was forged in dust and steel. Soso fell, and from their ashes rose the Empire of Mali, a realm so vast that it stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Niger River. His leadership laid the foundation for the empire that Mansa Musa would later make legendary. Gold, trade, and power flowed through his hands, but Sundiata's true legacy was nationhood. He gave his people a constitution, the Mandan Charter, one of the earliest declarations of human rights in world history, a constitution older than England's Magna Carta. The charter declared, "Every human life is a life. No one is to wrong his neighbor. Hunger is not good. Freedom is every man's right." Europe hadn't yet discovered the meaning of liberty. But in Africa, freedom had already been written in gold. Under Sundiata, Mali became a sanctuary of peace, trade, and culture. And though he died centuries ago, the griots of West Africa still sing his name. For the Lion of Mali never truly sleeps. From the strength of one boy's courage, Africa's golden age began. And his roar still echoes, across generations, across empires, across time itself. From the mountains of southern Africa rose a leader so fierce, so strategic, and so transformative that even European generals studied his tactics centuries later. His name, Shaka Kona, the man history remembers as Shaka Zulu. When Europe's armies came with rifles, they expected fear. But what they found in southern Africa was Shaka Zulu, a general, a visionary, a storm in human form. He took scattered clans and forged them into a centralized kingdom, the Zulu Empire, stretching across modern-day South Africa, a nation of warriors that no European dared to face. Shaka reinvented war. He shortened the traditional throwing spear into the deadly ikawa, a stabbing spear designed for close combat. He introduced the bullhorn formation, surrounding enemies like prey in a hunt. Under his command, the Zulu army became an unstoppable force, disciplined, silent, precise. His discipline, strategy, and unity turned the Zulu Empire into the most feared force on the continent. Though he ruled by iron and fire, his influence stretched far beyond war. He redefined African statecraft itself. While Europe crowned kings for birthright, Africa crowned one by sheer brilliance. Long after his death, his military genius inspired revolutionaries across continents. From African resistance movements to global military academies, his name endures, not just as a conqueror, but as an architect of African unity and pride. They called him Askia Muhammad I, but history remembers him as Askia the Great. He ruled the Songhai Empire, one of the largest empires in African history, stretching across what is now Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. Songhai was larger than most European kingdoms, richer than many imagined. Its ruler, Askia Muhammad I, was no mere conqueror. He was a scholar, a diplomat, and a visionary statesman. While Europe was burning witches and fighting over religion, Askia built universities, libraries, and courts of law. His capital, Timbuktu, became the intellectual heartbeat of the world, a place where mathematicians, poets, and scientists gathered under his protection. Askia reorganized the empire with precision. He created ministries for justice, finance, agriculture, and trade, a bureaucracy centuries ahead of Europe. He appointed governors to oversee distant provinces, ensuring laws were enforced and taxes collected fairly. His wealth beyond comprehension. Taxes, gold, salt, ivory, everything passed through his empire. Even the caliph in Egypt sent emissaries in awe of his power. But Askia's greatest treasure wasn't gold, it was knowledge. He proved that wisdom and wealth could rule side by side. From the highlands of Ethiopia, claiming a lineage traced back 3,000 years from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, Haile Selassie I rose as the last emperor to carry the ancient flame of African monarchy into the modern era. He was a symbol. In a world ruled by colonial empires, he stood tall as Africa's last sovereign emperor. Haile Selassie inherited a kingdom that had resisted colonization, preserved ancient traditions, and maintained sovereignty in a world increasingly dominated by European empires. In 1936, fascist Italy invaded Ethiopia. Selassie traveled to the League of Nations and delivered a speech that would echo across history. It is us today. It will be you tomorrow. But his legacy was more than resistance. Selassie modernized Ethiopia with schools, roads, hospitals, and embassies. He connected ancient Africa to the modern world while maintaining a lineage older than many European dynasties. His palaces shimmered with gold. His gardens stretched for miles, and world leaders, from Churchill to Roosevelt, came seeking his counsel. But his greatest wealth was spiritual. He carried the crown of an unbroken dynasty that lasted over 3,000 years. Even when the world tried to erase Africa's royal dignity, Selassie stood as proof that kingship was born in Africa and would never die there. For centuries, they told us Africa had no kings, no empires, no greatness. But they were wrong. From the golden palaces of Mali to the bronze walls of Benin, from the wisdom of Timbuktu to the courage of the Zulu, Africa's royalty redefined power itself. These kings weren't just rulers. They were visionaries, builders, protectors, men whose wealth, wisdom, and legacy shaped the world long before Europe ever rose. Their crowns were stolen, their stories buried, but their echoes remain in the blood of every African child who dares to remember. Because history can be hidden, but truth always rises. They tried to erase our kings. We bring them back to life. Subscribe to Echoes of the Ancients. Reclaim the forgotten.